Okay, well, okay, great, wonderful. Okay, well, welcome back, everyone. We're excited about these two last panels of students and advocates and workers in the field of African and Black migration studies. So I am very honored to be able to introduce this next panel called the U.S. African Student Panel, and it's going to be in conversation with Pierre. And Pierre is a research scholar and visiting global fellow at the University of San Francisco. And he's also a well-being coordinator at Partnership for Trauma Recovery in Berkeley. And so he will be leading the conversation with our students. And I'm particularly proud because we have our students from the Masters in Migration Studies presenting on their work and their experience as students in the university and within their different programs. We have Byers, who's a Master in Migration Studies student. Hamida Dahir also is a grad student in Master's in Migration Studies, and Zefitret Abera Molla, who is also in MIMS. And we also have Mutiu Olawunmi Fakorede, who is in MSc IDEC, right? A student, graduate. And we have Shennel Henries, who my understanding is you're working on international studies at the moment. Is that correct, Shennel? Yes. So welcome, everyone. We are excited to hear more about your research and your experience as students at the University of San Francisco. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Karina. And I am very honored. I'm very honored to be offered this opportunity for me to be part of this conversation. And when I was speaking with some of the panelists yesterday, and I was like, wow. And every time one was saying, and I was like, yes. So I couldn't wait to have this opportunity to have the panel share with you what they have for us. The theme for this conversation is research on African migration. This is the panel's focus, and the purpose is having the research, but also the personal and the collective experiences, both from the United States, from other countries as well. We have one calling right from Lagos in Nigeria. We have research that is going to talk about experiences in Mexico. Personal experiences as well will be shared. So I can't really wait to have the panelists share what they have for us. And Karina shared about who they are, and I want to add a little thing about who the panelists we have here on the screen. We have Mutiu. Mutiu Fakorede is one calling again from Lagos in Nigeria. And what time is it right now? Mutiu, what is the time at home? Are you on mute?
All right. Yeah, it's about 10 p.m. home now, 10 p.m. at night.
All right. Thank you. Thank you for being here. Mutiu is a seasoned development strategy, finance, and risk compliance consultant with years of experience working across oil, gas, telecommunications, energy, financial services, humanitarian, agriculture, general manufacturing, and the construction industries. He is a Big Four trained professional, highly skilled in research and development, business strategy, financial management, and risk compliance. All of these experiences are going to be brought into this conversation of what it means when someone has those experiences, and also his work in different parts of the world he will name. Mutiu has never been in the US, but is coming to the US at the University of San Francisco soon. And we'll be curious to hear what he already knows from different parts of the world where he has served, even beyond his home country. We have also Daisy. Daisy is from Liberia. Is a graduate student at the University of San Francisco in migration, Master in Immigration Studies. Her work focuses on the role of international law in protecting and supporting internally displaced persons. Her latest research aimed to highlight the struggles of Liberian displaced people, and especially those who have experienced severe violence and the trauma that's followed the civil war. We have also Molla. And Molla is born and raised in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, and is a multilingual migration scholar with experience studying and working in Ethiopia, France, the US, and Mexico. She's a second-year student in the Master of Arts in Immigration Studies program in the University of San Francisco. Her research interests lie at the intersection of migration and race, Blackness, racial, and gender oppression. Her most recent work looks at the hardships faced by Black, African, and Haitian migrants forced to remain in Mexico due to restrictive migration policies. We do also have Shennel. Shennel is a She-Can scholar and an outstanding international student from Liberia. She's pursuing a major in international studies with a regional track, Africa, and a concentration, global politics and society. Shennel has long been an advocate and a transformational leader who believes in the power of people working together to make a difference. I'm sure we are going to see this in this conversation. And then we have Hamida, whom you have seen in the other presentations. Hamida is a mental health activist, poet, and advocate for refugees. She has lived and worked in Somalia, Kenya, and the US. Her most recent research centers on the effects of trauma, violence, and displacement on the mental health of refugees. The project is particularly focused on the use of resistance tools, such as indigenous knowledge, production, and the creative writing in building supportive community networks and championing the construction of a mental health stigma. She is also a graduate student at the University of San Francisco's Master in Migration Studies, or MEMS program. I know everyone here in the audience, they really can't wait to hear what you bring to this conversation. And I know that for those who are also there with the morning presentations, there's so much you can bridge to what has been already discussed. And I'm going to start from there is this conversation that we were having in the morning, what we are hearing in the morning. Here I'm referring to Manuel, Dr. Manuel Pastore. He discussed about California as becoming a major destination, especially for African immigrants. He also added that these communities, this population is often invisibilized and less understood. And I want to take this opportunity to speak with Shennel. Shennel, you have offered to share about your personal experiences. You are from Liberia and you had last semester in Liberia. This semester you were in San Francisco, a semester here again. And there is, I think, a lot you can share. And I'm so thankful that you are willing to share about how do we, what is not understood or what is kept invisible, even though it is loud in the people's hearts. I mean, those who experience them.
Thank you so much for the opportunity. Once again, hello everyone. I'm Shennel Henries, and I would like to share my experiences on some of the things that I have gone through or been through back in Liberia while studying home. Like being a first year undergraduate and international student, to be honest, is hard, but I'm grateful for the opportunity. And I would like to recognize that there are a lot of opportunities and freedom and other offers that America has, like to offer us, we immigrants or international students, but also just to highlight that there are other sides to these opportunities. And most often when people come to the US or students come to the US from anywhere around the world, there are stereotypes and misconceptions about how people are viewed or how we are viewed. And one thing that I have realized is just like the sense of being from Africa, the first thing or some of the like thing or idea that people realize as soon as they see you is poverty or limited resources, or just the stereotype of having nothing so much. And that has been like one of the things I have been confronted with, even if they don't say it verbally, but because of the picture that is given to Africa, people realize that, and it is like good to think out of the box, to think of other things, but I just wanted to bring that up. And another thing is like people sometimes question your intelligence and somehow undermine your value or the way how you might perceive things. We are international students. We are not only coming to study, to learn lessons, but we are also battling like the environment, getting used to the way how people respond to us, the way how we respond to things. So it's like a lot going on, and not like we just want to sit in the back. There are language barrier, there are other challenges and unique challenges that students are faced with, but people don't really see that, but they just like have that clear picture on how they should view people from Africa or people from all around the world. And I just want to talk about again that it is good that when we come, we are not only focusing on our education, also we are educating ourselves on the like the picture of America or how America it is. Because you have to, back home, we are in this bubble sometimes that we are the dominant race, and though we have like tribal differences or we have tribal groups, but we also recognize that we are one people, but yeah, it's really diverse, that you have to keep in mind how you relate to other people, how you talk to people. Some words that you will say home, you can say it here. So it's just like intriguing to see that the first thing that people will see in another person might be your skin color, might be your tone of voice, or might be the thing that they have read or seen on the news, or just one thing they can somehow categorize it of you being that person.
Wow, that is really a great beginning of this conversation, and I'm sure we will be unpacking more. And these things stick to me. What you say, that what you can say at home, you cannot say it here. And building on what we had in the conversation in the morning, and there was something interesting about like if there's something in even your tone. If you can't say it in your home, where you are as your home right now, I think you're in San Francisco. Is that correct? All right. And how do we create that home? I wonder if that's create that tuneness of people being here and being somewhere else when their soul does not find a space to fit. But I will invite the next person, Molla. Looking at your research, and I think maybe there was some in connections with what Shennel just shared. Looking at your research, your research interests lie at the intersection of migration, race, Blackness, racial, gender oppression, and throughout the last 2 years, you have been actually working on a research on experiences of Black, African, and Haitian migrants forced to remain in Mexico. And I kind of like, while we are speaking about an experience from the US, I'm curious to hear about what's your findings. Did anything surprise you from your study? in Mexico?
Yeah, so as you mentioned, I've been looking at the experiences of Black, African, and Haitian migrants in Mexico. I've specifically focused on Tijuana, Mexico City, and Tapachula at the Mexico-Guatemala border. And from what I've noticed, so obviously Mexico has its own population of Afro-Mexicans, but they tend to live in other states, Oaxaca, Guerrero, and Veracruz, which are more coastal states, which is initially where enslaved Africans were brought to Mexico, and they stayed in those parts of Mexico. And Mexico is right now actually struggling to recognize the presence and basically recognize Afro-Mexicans. And African and Haitian migrants arrived in Mexico at this very crucial time. Only in 2020 did Mexico finally recognize Afro-Mexicans as a distinct ethnic group. And I think it's very interesting that this happened a couple of years after, 2-3 years after African and Haitian migrants arrived in Mexico. And I've had the chance to interview migrants from Eritrea, from Congo, from Nigeria, from Mali, in Tijuana and Mexico City mostly. And I've also had the chance to go to Tapachula and see firsthand what's happening to them. And I think it's a mix of, as I mentioned in my research, it's an intersection of 3 types of discrimination, because being Black, being hyper visible in a country where a lot of people are not Black, and where even Afro-Mexicans who are Mexicans are always questioned, and their Mexicanness is always put in question basically by Mexican authorities. And I think the other discrimination they face is not being able to speak Spanish. Most of these migrants come from English or French speaking countries or local African languages. And they struggle accessing services. They struggle going to the supermarket. They struggle with interpretation services. They have no idea. Sometimes they've even applied for asylum and they don't even know they applied for asylum because they were never provided interpretation services and they are not able to read the documents they are forced to sign. And the other discrimination they face is just being migrants. Similar to Central American migrants, they also face discriminations for being migrants. So when you go to Tapachula, you talk to people from Tapachula and they're going to tell you, oh, well, they come and they take jobs, and Tapachula is already in, it's in Chiapas, and Chiapas is not the richest state because it's an indigenous state, so it already has its own problems, and this only adds on to the problems of the state, and the Mexican government doesn't address these issues. And I think for me, what I've noticed mostly in Mexico is that race is so much more different than in other countries. I've lived in France where even me as a Black person in France, I was considered more mulatto. And then in the US, it's the 1 drop blood rule where I'm just Black. And then in Mexico, all of a sudden I'm morena and everybody's like, oh, you're not Black, you're morena. And it's like, it's so much more complex and so much more different. And I think that's why we have to look at, when we look at the situation of Black, African, and Haitian migrants in Mexico, we can't look at it through the US lens because it's so different. And it also, I mean, Mexico is not a white country. It's more mestizo than anything else, or indigenous, but it's not a white country. And that's also something that we need to look at when we look at their experiences. But I think it's so important to highlight how the discriminations they face is always intersectional. In one situation, they can be victims of racism and they can be victims of discrimination for being migrants and also not even understanding what's going on because they don't speak Spanish. And I thought that was what was the most interesting. And even between the different group of migrants, you can see the difference, like Haitians, because they speak French and Creole and because they've usually spent a couple of years in Latin America, they've already picked up on some Spanish. So their experiences are very different from Cameroonians or Eritreans who mostly speak English if they're from the Anglophone region in Cameroon. And their experiences are so different. And accessing jobs is different when you don't speak Spanish in Tijuana or Mexico City. So yeah, I think that's what I noticed.
Wow, it is really truly helpful to have the perspective of when we look at Mexico. And you, in your research, you also talk about mixture. There is a word in Spanish that I don't know how to pronounce it, but you in your research you put a parenthesis as the word meaning mixture. What is it, and why does that matter?
Yeah, so the idea is it's mestizaje, and mestizaje it dominates the national discourse on race in Mexico, and it's a key concept. So basically it's the idea that all Mexicans are a mixture between Spaniards and indigenous people. And initially this ideology was created to unify the country, but in the process, it alienated not just Afro-Mexicans, but also indigenous people, because the idea that Mexico is just mestizo is not true. You go to Chiapas, not everybody's mestizo. A lot of people are just indigenous. And this ideology that has dominated Mexican national discourse on race, it's also what's contributed to the fact that Afro-Mexicans were not recognized as a distinct ethnic group until this year in the census. And being recognized as a distinct ethnic group, it affects the amount of funds they get, schooling. And I went to this small village in Oaxaca, it's called Chacagua, and they don't have electricity because they don't have funding, and it's an Afro-Mexican village. And it's crazy to think that in Mexico City, it's such a big city, and Mexico, I never imagined Mexico would be like this. And it's crazy because when you go to like indigenous or in more Afro-Mexican villages, that's when you see poverty, because there's no funding to those communities.
Wow, thank you so much. Thank you so much. It's interesting to see how that concept was there with good intentions. That's kind of as a form of social integration, but it's end up being more discriminatory, if I understood it correctly. Yeah, thank you. And I'm going to Lagos. Mutiu, you have done in your research. In your research, you've done something that I found really interesting that I have not thought about in that framework. In your research, you talk about first there is where you talk about that there will not be any meaningful policy impact. I'm quoting you. There will not be any meaningful policy impact if the African migrants ecosystem is not fully understood. Then you say that this ecosystem, you coined it the migrants hexagon. What is that hexagon? What is the ecosystem and the hexagon, migrants hexagon? I know it can maybe not be easy to unpack it in the 3 minutes I'm going to give you, but yes, try as what is it and why does it matter?
All right, thank you, everyone. Thank you, the coordinator, as we were taught those days in primary school. Thank you, my coordinator, my honorable debaters, and all of those. Okay, maybe to contextualize this better, I've had the opportunity of working with KPMG in Nigeria, in Singapore, in South Africa, in Kenya, in Cairo, and also in Ghana. I've also worked with the United Nations in Rome, in Zambia, Zimbabwe, Malawi, South Africa itself, a number of Southern African countries. And my experiences all along is actually what is putting this together for me. Right, you see, the moment an individual makes a decision to leave his country to become a migrant, to go somewhere, is coming with a number of packages, right, both good and bad. In the first instance, some of the good ones could be, he's got a very good talent, he's got knowledge that's going to be bringing to the table. Probably he's very wealthy, right? He wants to go and invest in another country, right? Another thing which could be positive or negative is the value, the culture of that individual, right? Chances are that the culture he's brought up with, everything that he's got, might not be fitting into the new environment that he's going, right? Okay, another thing which could be negative is also his attitude, the vices. Probably he's a terrorist, probably he's a drug addict, probably he's he doesn't relate well to people, you know, all of those put together. Immediately he makes that move to go into a new country. He's going to be faced with what I call the hexagon challenge, 6 of them. We're going to be looking at the poverty structure of where he's going. No matter the amount of money he's got with him that is going into a new country, he's not going to be able to hit the ground running. And if he doesn't plan well with what he has, chances are that in no time he's going to be poor, right? He's going to be dragged into that poverty line that that host country is already having, right? There's also the educational bit. The educational system from countries, you know, they vary, right? So what you think you know, what you think you have upstairs, the certification you think you're carrying around, by the time you take it to a new environment, it might just be like any paper out there, right? Even the knowledge, the syllabus, the synopsis, everything might not be able to fit into the new environment. And there's also the issue of housing, right? For every economy that is thriving, there are plans based on the number of population, based on the population that they've got, you know, the number of housing that they have, be it public, be it private. If you're coming into a new environment, you're going to be stretching that facility, right? So you're also being faced with housing challenge. And before you know it, in no time, if care is not taken, you're going to become a destitute, right? And the other one is being employable, you know, getting into the appreciable labor force of the host country, right? The question is the skill set that you're coming with, or whatever it is that you think you have, can it really fit, you know, into the employability demand of the host economy, right? Oh, I am an engineer in Nigeria, I'm an engineer in Lagos. What you are today based on what you've been taught over the years, based on how you've been raised, right? You're coming with that culture. How does it fit, as it were, into the new environment that you're coming in? I'm going to quickly, time permits me, I'm going to quickly share a story, right? While I was working in a particular company, when our bosses walk into the office in the morning and they're looking good, you can say, you can talk about it. Then I changed my job, I joined another one, right? And I thought it's the whole same thing. And a female was walking into the office, and I said that. It may interest you to know that that was my greatest undoing. For almost about 2 years, I was struggling to change the perception because people looked at me, oh, this guy doesn't know what he's doing. He can't be making comments like this, which ties back to the stereotype that Shennel talked about, right? And the last one, which is the social functionality. In every environment, there is that social fabric that it's either you fit in or you fit out, right? If you cannot fit in, then you become a problem, right? If you look at all of these affecting an average African, affecting an average Black person, it's really affecting the psyche, you know, of an individual. And which ties back to why you see some of us, some of Africans rather, taking some kind of decisions that to a normal person out there is quite drastic. I'm at the moment working on a research work. I call it the impact of skin tone on socio-political and economic outcomes of an individual. The question is, why do an average Black person want to bleach their skin? Right? A lot of work has been done, and one of the things that we found out is that the mentality or the mandate that white is always right. Right? Even Nelson Mandela wrote in one of his books, I think, Marching to Freedom. He said that he thought that if he behaves well in this life, when he reincarnates, he's going to reincarnate as a white person. You know, that's to tell you the extent of, how do I call it, the brainwash, you know, that an average Black person has gone through over the years. And trust me, this is actually a driving force as to the way we behave, the way we relate, the way we get along with people. So it's a big challenge, right? And until whatever the research work we're doing is able to speak to this ecosystem, you know, of that individual, trust me, we're not going to be able to achieve anything, right? Whatever you want to do, you should be able to speak to the totality of the being, right? Where he's coming from, where he's going, what he intends to achieve. All of those must be put together. I'll consider in whatever the research work we want to do. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. I really appreciate what you say. Would you say them like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, like poverty and the 6 components of it? Would you summarize like that?
All right. So poverty, education, housing, employment, acculturation, and social functionality. So I call them the hexagon challenge.
Wow, thank you so much. Thank you. And sometimes I see that sometimes we happen to have so many things, and sometimes we need to like give them a frame so that we can visualize them better. And I'm curious to know, and also sometimes we classify things in a way that sometimes we lose some important components. And I'm curious to know what Daisy thinks about these framework. Are there some other things you think that, okay, actually this is the package, or do you see some things that can be added and maybe aid or 9 components of these framework that Mutiu has suggested from your own experience and research?
Thank you so much for that. Yeah, I think for the most part, he did list a lot of those things that pack into it. And speaking from like my personal experience, and then I would try to link it in with my research. You know, I was born in Liberia. I was there during the Civil War. I recently came to the US about 10 years now, roughly. And the experience, those like experience are different, are very different. When I came, I ended up in the Midwest in Indiana. And as a African as an African in Indiana, and also being Black was also a issues, you know, for me that I went through. And some of the things is like the biggest issues was the language barrier and the cultural barrier was two different. Like I came thinking like I spoke English because that's what I do. I speak English. And but then when I came to the US, I was told that I don't speak English. For the first time when I came to the US, I realized that I was Black. It sounds very wrong to say I realized that I was Black, but Blackness is not something I grew up learning about. You know, we have ethnic group, we have tribes, we have different like places that we belong, but I never had to look at my skin and be like I'm Black. It's never something that came across my mind until in my middle school class, it was 7th grade, until a girl came up to the teacher in front of the class and said, "Why does Daisy look different and sound different than the rest of us?" And as an African who's new to the country, I respond back to her as, "I don't look different. I don't speak different. I speak just like you. I look just like you." Until the teacher said out in class, "No, what she meant is like you're Black and we're white." And so that's when I first realized that like the color of my skin matters when you're in the US than it did in another country. And when it comes to, so from that, you know, that's what shaped me into the person I am and which brought me to my research. My research focused heavily on displaced population, internally displaced population, looking at and on how international community can get involved in when it comes to protecting displacement, and not just with displacement, but like looking at African migrants in as a general, as a whole. You know, Africa is the second, one of the second largest producing migrant continent to the world. But yet, when we are talking about migration, when we're talking about refugees, we never really include Africa in those conversations. And so in my research, I talk about how when the topic of migration, when the topic of refugees come on the table, we need to start to include Africans in it. We need to start to understand why are these Africans leaving their countries to migrate to another country. We need to start looking into those. And majority of the reason for why Africans leave their country and go to another country, yes, is for better educations. But we also have to look at what like the history behind Africans, the history behind like the continent in general. We have had for the past up to now in this present day, I can't even say for the past, we still have these Western countries that go into the country and explore Africans. They explore African culture. They explore our research. They explore our government. They explore us for everything we have. They comes, they take and take and take, but never truly give back, you know? And so when you do things like that, you leave these people, you leave us in the position where when we don't know, like we have no more resources in our home. I'm speaking as a Liberian. Liberia is one of the poorest, if not the poorest country in the world. Liberia has experienced 14 years civil war. Liberia has went through the Ebola outbreak. Liberia is now facing this pandemic, which the rest of the world is facing this pandemic. But those are some of the things that just happen in a tiny country with a population of just 5 million, right? And like you have Liberians who migrated outside of Liberia to come to the US. Part of the reason for that is not because we don't have the resources that we need to help and support our people. It's just we don't know how to use those resources, or we have had missionaries. We have these Western countries come in and take away basically all of our resources. Education system. I was just recently in Liberia a couple of months ago, and I had a chance to visit Lofa County, Dima County, Ban County, and two other county. I just visited those county and went to different schools, like high school, to see how schools and like school system is. And sorry. And when you look at those education systems, you have students who are dedicated, who are wanting to work, who are wanting to do this and things like that. But then the resources are not there. And so you look into it. And so when we start to talk about it, we need to look more into this like ideas of poverty, education. We need to look into this like his sorry, I'm about to say your name wrong, but like what my panelist just said about this whole hexagon theory, there's more to it, and we need to be able to dissect all of those things and look deeper into why all of this is happening. So thank you.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you for bringing us home and for bringing that close to your heart, to your home. And yeah, we'll find a way to follow up with that with the education. But before we talk about education, I'm curious with what Hamida thinks with all that have been discussed, and also your research interest is on mental health among refugee communities. I'm curious about how you see in your research as the impact, but most importantly, I want you to tie to what you say in your research about, you talk about the use of resistance tools, such as indigenous knowledge production as a form of resistance. And I want to connect it to what Mutiu said was, Mutiu said, what is white is always right, is how it is generally perceived. On the other side, this is talking about the experiences in Liberia. We have these resources, but we don't know how to leverage them, and is accusing the system, the education system, to be probably too poor to be helpful to leverage those resources from home. So with the knowledge production, do you see that as a solution how do you see that indigenous knowledge production as a form of resistance to experiences like this?
Right. Well, thank you to my fellow panelists for raising such beautiful points. I think one of the things I discussed, and if I was to add one element to the hexagon that we're discussing, that Mutiu, so beautifully put, would be mental health, right? And when we talk about migration, I think we need to distinctly separate refugee migration from immigration, right? While they have different distinct legal definitions. And so these two communities, even though interrelated and interdependable, are not treated the same way, right? And are not received the same way. So with my research that's specifically focused on refugee communities, and this can easily be, discussed within immigrant communities, I think one of the biggest things is mental health. A lot of these communities are coming from countries with a lot of violence, displacement, have gone through, most of them actually have come through refugee camps. Some of them have been stuck there for decades and are being resettled into North America, the United States, of course, European countries, where there's of course, racial hierarchies that they're walking into, as we were discussing earlier on in the other panels and with the other guest speakers. They're walking into countries that have different cultural and religious makeup. So a lot of Islamophobia a lot of xenophobia, and a lot of anti-immigrant sentiment. And with, in the last few years, we have seen the rise of nationalism, in Western countries. And so what I bring up is, and what you call, what I call in my research, these forms of resistance, of which one of them is indigenous knowledge production, which is to say, let's take away this stereotypical story of these communities that constantly need saving. Right? Yes, we have come from places of trouble. We have been immigrants, we have been refugees, we have been through a lot of displacement and violence, but we're also people of agency, right? So you deconstructing the narrative that we need saving, and we create the elements with which we're saved. One of these is, for example, transnational activism, whereby refugees and immigrant communities have strong links both in the diaspora and back at home. Right? This can be done through remittances, as we were earlier on talking about people sending money back home. For example, Somalia, a country whose entire economic makeup depends on the remittances sent back home. This is for your relatives' education. It's for building infrastructure, and we see how that becomes an economic lifeline to the country. The other thing we see is community building within the refugee or immigrant communities in the United States, especially. We see a lot of religious organizing, how mosques and churches become central to enabling the community to bond, to build networks, to help each other, to fundraise for necessary things. But the main thing I think I raise as far as mental health problems go is the idea of transcultural education. When refugees and immigrants are resettled in this country, often integration models don't look at the mental health crisis that is happening within these communities, right? There's a very orthodox way of looking at psychology. What I'm saying is, let's look at it with the use of critical psychology. You have to bring cultural nuances to concepts like treatment or clinical treatment or therapy. You have to do this within social settings. And you have to do this, and often, especially within the Somali community in the United States, this is done through creative writing and storytelling, where poetry is essential in telling the community's history, both violent it may be or good it may be, as well as the way to move forward. And we see, of course, women at the center of this conversation, in which now we bring nuances of gender relations within the community, of religious organizing as well. But I think what Daisy was saying in connection to, as well as what Mutiu was raising, is that there is a lot of unknown knowledge about the community. When we see academia being, articles being published about communities, when we see policies being made for communities without their presence within the setting, then it becomes problematic, because then you don't bring those transcultural nuances to that integration model, or to that solution fixing. I would say problem fixing.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you so much for weaving all of those to these lenses of looking at as an unknown knowledge. I think I'm seeing that as an opportunity, that there's hopes, knowing that there is actually something. There's something we can look into. Only if we can also probably understand ourselves as knowers as well. Just consumers of knowledge. So I really appreciate that. I want to know if there is, we have a few minutes to end with this panel, but I want to see if there are some questions that will already raised. Lizzie, are there any questions from the audience that you can read?
Not on the Q&A so far. Everyone feel free to add questions.
Yes, please. Yes, I hear you.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I don't have per se a question, but I really wanted to tell our youth, how proud I am. And this is what we've been talking about, the whole day. And we are engaging in a process where we're going to have to look at, all the segments of our community, our young people, coming out of universities, our women, our elderly people, our business people. And I think we're going to need all these resources and put them together in order really, to address the issues that are impacting us. And then because we in America to live the American dream, whether we're going to go back home one day or not, that's not the question. I think that the question is that, how we can thrive as a community. And then, I can't tell you enough, how proud I am, and I'm pretty sure that most of everybody is feeling the same way, and keep up with the good work, and we have work to do, and we counting on you. Thank you for your work.
Thank you so much, Abudu. We really appreciate you. We appreciate the inspiration we get from you. So thank you so much. I want you, the panelists, whether it is 10 seconds or 15 or 30, I will give you that break, and I will ask the audience to be patient with that. I'm going to ask you to take 30 seconds thinking, if you will, you were to think about your own experiences being an immigrant at some point, whether it is currently or in the past, or your own experiences. What is that thing you wish, whether it is the people from your own community or anyone else who does not share the experiences, but is truly want to be in solidarity with you and with your community? I want you to be there. I'm going to give you 30 seconds to sit with that. So, before I know that there are a few questions from that, the panel, from the audience. I will see if, can someone read them? So save that answer as we will close with that. The answer that you have, hold on with that. What's question, if there is a question from the audience?
Sure, I can read it. Na asks, specifically Zefitret, your research on migrants in Mexico is fascinating. Can you speak more about this construction of the cosmic race and slavery, and whether African migrants are aware of this history and the ways they fit in it?
I think the Afro-Mexicans are aware of their history. When I was in Chakawa, they were like, "Oh, you look like us, but where are you from?" And I said, "Africa." And they said, "Oh, we're also from there, but a very long time ago, as you know." And as for African migrants, I haven't specifically asked them the question what they think about Afro-Mexicans or Mexico's history with slavery and all that, because most of the African migrants arrive in Mexico through Chiapas, which is a mostly indigenous state, and then they make their way through Mexico all the way to northern Mexico, to Tijuana or other border cities. And these states and cities are not known to have a large population of Afro-Mexicans, and really Afro-Mexicans are concentrated in specific state and coastal towns. But so just to explain the idea of this cosmic race, it was an ideology once Mexico gained its independence from Spain and Mexico became a republic and all that. The mestizaje ideology, which is the idea that everybody, all Mexicans are a mix between Spaniards and indigenous people, it created this racialized system where everyone who doesn't pass as white must aspire to fit into this mold of mestizaje. So you have to kind of find your place. So that's why there's so many terms like morena, because, okay, if you're not white, if you're not indigenous, or if you're not Black, then you need to find your place in this mold. And the closer you are to whiteness, the better it is in Mexico, in terms of finding employment, in terms of marriage, in terms of navigating everything, basically. Even walking down the streets, there are stories of Afro-Mexicans who have been deported from Mexico because Mexican authorities didn't believe they were Mexican, or they've been asked to sing the Mexican national anthem, for example. And it was supposed to be an ideology with a democratic and inclusive aspect, but in reality, as I've mentioned earlier, it's very discriminatory, and it's also based on the inferiority of indigenous and Black people. And there have been efforts recently since 2015 to include them, and like some states where there's a huge population of Afro-Mexicans in Oaxaca, Guerrero, and Veracruz, they've put in place exhibitions or museums or their own measures to really recognize the importance. I mean, Mexico's first president was actually Afro-Mexican, but in all the pictures you see of him, he's lighter than he probably actually was at that time. I'm sure he wasn't that light, but he's like every picture, every drawing you see of him, he's white passing, and but he's Afro-Mexican. So this is just one example of how you are meant to fit in this mold of mestizaje, and that affects Africans as well, because African and Haitian migrants as well, because if you're navigating a country that's already dealing with this lack of recognition for Afro-Mexicans, then how can you expect this country to treat you well when they can't even treat their own Afro-Mexicans well, when they're also put aside and marginalized? And you look at electricity, you look at school, you look at all this, and in Afro-Mexican and indigenous pueblos, that's where the lowest rates of schooling are. That's where the lowest rates of electricity or healthcare. Like, there are villages without hospitals, or they have to walk, like, or take a colectivo to get to another city to access healthcare. And this is just proof of how the system is basically so racist that it doesn't recognize its own, it doesn't want to help its own population of Afro-Mexicans and um, indigenous people. And this translates into the current policies with indigenous Central Americans and African and Haitian migrants.
I will also, there's also a question asked by Sane. Sane asked a question to Mutiu. What non-traditional or community-based resources do you think would be most beneficial to individuals who move to a new country to help them overcome the hexagon challenge, especially the social fabric aspect? Non-traditional resources or a community-based framework that we probably not necessarily learn from school, but the community have that knowledge, have that understanding. Are there some examples of those resources that can help? In 30 seconds.
All right. Thank you so much for that question. I thought in the earlier session, someone had asked a question, what prompted, I think, Hamida to come to San Francisco, California, and she said something around, oh, okay, probably a Black immigrant community there, and probably it feels like home, right? So I think one of the things that can be done to address that we can get from the community is first and foremost understanding the community where it is that you're migrating to. I think that gives a better landing, a soft landing. And I also feel strongly that the community itself needs to embrace, the new entrant into this environment. I want to commend the effort of Adubu Traore and the people in that African something network. Am I correct? Putting all of this in place to ensure that they give that support, in form of a kind of a communal support that makes an average Black individual that is coming from anywhere, in the world to have a kind of soft landing, either settling or fitting into the culture. So I feel strongly that there's a lot that needs to be done on both parts, both the community that is going to be accepting and that individual, right, that is going somewhere. You don't go to a place where you are not wanted, as it were. You don't go to a place where your chances of survival is also very, very slim. So there's a need for you to do a kind of analysis ahead, even before leaving, to know what area, what state, is going to better suit your personality, suit your objective, and suit your survivability. Thank you.
And I will also hear about the communal support, which I think can be helpful in co-regulating the stress of from the newness. Now back to the exercise about now 30 seconds or whatever, 15 seconds. What is the one thing you think our audience should do as a result of this panel discussion? And I'm asking that from that question, from that assignment I gave you a couple of minutes ago. What is that one thing? I will start from Hamida.
I would say cultural humility, to come to communities, especially when they want certain problems within the community fixed. I think that anybody who's an ally to Black communities, to immigrant communities, should come to them with cultural humility and expect to learn and listen rather than be the voice at that given minute.
Thank you so much. We love that cultural humility, very important. Daisy?
Yeah, I would have to agree with Hamida on cultural humanity and also being aware of when you go into community, you do need to be aware of those community that you're going into. You need to be considerate with those community, even if you're not of that community. If you want to become an ally to the Black community, you need to go in there with the willingness to listen, to learn, and to also try to make a difference without breaking in that the savior complex into the community. Just go there to listen and learn from those communities.
Thank you so much. Zefitret?
I would say for me, community organizing, because a lot of other immigrant communities, they organize so much and they help each other so much and they invest in their communities. And I think it's great that we have organizations like the African Advocacy Network, which is one of its, I mean, maybe not one of its kind, but there aren't that many in California and there aren't that many in the US which focus on specifically African and Afro-Caribbean immigrants. So I think we need to have more organizations like that. And I think it's our role as immigrants who've already made it to the US to invest not just our time, but also our money, because these organizations need the money to work. And I think when I see other immigrant organizations, I'm so jealous because there's just so many for them. And for us, sometimes not enough. And I think we should organize more and invest more in our communities as well.
Thank you for bringing that community organizing. Very important here, and the listening. Very important. Going to Mutiu in a few seconds.
All right, thank you so much. I think they've all spoken well about what the advice is going to be. But for me, I think the first thing is that don't judge the book by the cover, right? Mm-hmm. So that you can bin stereotype. Just throw stereotype in the bin. And mm-hmm. Lastly, listen, and listen. Listen to understand. Don't listen to respond. Thank you.
Right. Thank you so much. Listening is very important. Shennel?
For me, I would say the creation of safe space and genuine conversation to do away with performative activism or performative, like just following the crowd, but being supportive, like with a whole heart and not just being, I'm over there.
Wow, thank you so much. Thank you so much. You did a lot going from different parts of the world, from your personal experiences to your research to suggesting what we can do. And every time you were talking, I was feeling like this person, you were talking about me when you say like, hey, I felt like more Blacker, if that is a word, that was me as an example. I feel like I'm being more Black being in the US than when I was back home. I didn't know much about that. So many other things. That is one of the examples that when you were speaking, you are really speaking to my heart, and I really appreciate that. And I believe that that is the same for the other audience as well. Thank you so much, and we are going to have a second panel. And dear students, and I hope that in the near future, we will have you again to unpack some of those areas that's really needed more conversations. I hope that we will see more opportunities like this.